Okay, welcome. Thank you everyone for attending yet another amazing Linking Your Thinking conference session. So this one is a friend of mine who I met on the Obsidian forums and was just kind of everywhere. When she got on there, I was just wondering if the person ever slept. Then we started talking, and Eleanor has become a friend. We've gone on multiple YouTube sessions and just kind of nerded out on different things. And it's just a pleasure to kind of introduce Eleanor to us all today. I'll just read a little bit about her and then what is going to be in this session. So Eleanor studied philosophy and religion before graduating from law school. These days, she runs the Obsidian communities, where you probably know her from the amazing Obsidian Roundup newsletter, and spends bits of time left over writing stories and articles that bring history and magic to life. In the process, she also takes a lot of notes. Eleanor, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. This came in. I don't know if it went to everybody in the chat. I'm just getting over COVID. So I have like the faintest of a little like every now and then. But other than that, I'm pretty much fine. And
Wow.
life is good. Weather's nice.
Okay.
Been trying out this fun new vault that you like didn't quite talk me into, but you gave me the idea for, and it's been interesting to roll without plugins for a while. A little weird, but interesting.
Yeah, no plugins in Obsidian. That will be interesting.
Safe mode.
So, yeah, safe mode. I remember safe mode. Yeah. Well, that's great.
Those many months ago, and it's like, oh, this is an interesting program. What does it do? And then it's like, oh, well, all of these things. Then you go wild for a while. I think I said to somebody on Twitter, it's a little bit like doing Whole30. Like you don't want to do Whole30 for sort of your whole life if you don't have to, but every now and then it's interesting to sort of go back to the vanilla experience, or like, what was it like to eat like a Paleolithic ancestor kind of thing. So it's, I don't know, it's been interesting. It's been fun.
That's amazing. Well, hey, wonderful. And let me just introduce your session a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to you all the way, and then I'll just be in the background. So Eleanor is going to be leading us through a session, outlining a thought process by linking your notes with a strong focus on a basic method that anyone can use. And there, as already mentioned, there are no plugins or themes that you have to worry about figuring out. And this will be a tough one, but there will also not be any obscure jargon. So I'll hold you to that one. We'll see how that goes. But very excited, Eleanor. So here, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll be in the background if you need anything.
All right, let's see if sharing my screen breaks PowerPoint. Ha! Did it work? Do I have a... I don't see any green.
Yes.
So did that... Okay, that did work. Excellent.
We see it.
Good to know. There's always something. So this presentation, and normally Nick and I go back and forth, but this is a presentation, is going to be about using safe mode for your notes. There are a lot of reasons that somebody might need to use safe mode. You're on a locked down work computer, you don't trust plugins, you have, very safe like kinds of things where you don't want to risk, rolling beta plugins like I normally do, where something could go wrong and, delete things or whatever. There's lots of reasons for it. So, and also there's this impulse, I think, when, certainly I do presentations and articles and notes, and it's like, look at this cool thing I could teach you. That's, this thing that I figured out. And sometimes that's too much, right? Like if I were in my classroom teaching my students, I would certainly not be teaching them note-taking with JavaScript. I would be teaching them a much more straightforward kind of thing. So the idea here is to get back to basics and show that you don't need all of the fancy things that you can do in order to accomplish goals. So my background is, like Nick said, I'm mostly an author. I'm a teacher, but I think the thing that differentiates me from a lot of other sort of note-taking productivity people who talk about that a lot is that for the vast majority of my life, I did not need notes. I passed the bar exam like basically without studying. I got through high school without taking any notes more complicated or having any organizational system more complicated than putting the worksheets one after another in chronological order. And then that like worked for me. I was a pretty good student. I have a pretty good memory. I learn fairly easily. So I come at note-taking from a different perspective than trying to learn. Usually I'm just trying to keep things organized and like have things at hand. So when I'm researching something, usually I start by learning something interesting. And I have a lot of different places where I learn things from, but the most important thing that I do is simplify what I've learned into a very short claim statement. I make my note title the claim. And I like to say that this is a bit like if I had an index card, which I do. So if I have an index card, I would put the title on one side and then my evidence on the other side. And then as I'm flipping through my notes, yes, like an argument, as I'm flipping through my notes, I'm really only looking at the claims. They're nice and big. I don't have to read a lot. I'm just looking for, okay, does any of this support my argument? Because most of what I am using my notes for is, quite frankly, supporting arguments. Usually I remember the actual information, and what I don't remember is the exact source and the exact words. So a lot of the common advice that you'll get if you're trying to learn something is make sure you put everything in your own words. You know, you don't need to put everything, all of the highlights and stuff, like that's not the important part. That doesn't help you learn. And for a lot of things that is extremely true. It doesn't necessarily help you learn, but it does help you when you're arguing with somebody either on the internet or at a party. And most of my notes are very handy at, those moments. So I'm a big believer in knowing where I got something from. So I will write that down because that's my focus. Like I distill it into the claim so that I can find it again easily. But really I'm trying to like prove the thing or just find it again. If somebody says to me on Twitter, which happens occasionally, hey, that thing you just said is wrong. Like, I don't want to feel stupid. I want to be able to say, oh, well, I got it from here. This is the article. This is why I thought that. And that's happened to me a couple of times. And I always feel better when I know how I went wrong, because then I can fix it, right? Then I know, oh, this is the kind of mistake I made in order to get this wrong impression of something. Because realistically, I have a lot of every every kind of note. Like I'm learning a lot of different things. So I'm not going to be a subject matter expert in everything that I am talking about. That isn't my interest. I'm a much more broad learner. So I'll create a source note if I have more than one claim coming from a source. And if not, I won't bother. I'm much more interested in what the claim is useful for, in actually using it, in having it handy when I need it. So I will absolutely, like Nick kind of preaches a little bit, I will group related concepts into notes with topical names. I will sort my notes into folders for ease of browsing and access control. And then I surf through my tags when I need to find that information again, or I will start with the note that I am on and go from there. It's important to me to be able to find the claims that I need when I need them and use my notes as references, not just for like content creation. Although, yes, I obviously create a lot of content. Plugins like Readwise, Quick Add, Hover Editor, Autolinker, which is the one I miss the most, surprisingly. Tag Wrangler, Natural Language Dates, Zotero Desktop Connector, and more. All of those are wonderful plugins, and they make things faster and easier. And every now and then, you'll see somebody on Reddit or Twitter, but for me, it's usually Reddit, will say something like, well, if you're trying to future-proof your notes, then you shouldn't use plugins because you'll become dependent on plugins, and then you won't be able to use your notes. And I have discovered this last week using my notes with safe mode on that my notes are still completely usable. Almost all of the plugins that I have historically used have saved me time. They have saved me energy. They have saved me clicks, but they haven't fundamentally made my notes impossible to use in Notepad, or I joked about this on Twitter, but you could use these notes using Nano on the sort of like in the terminal, or even VI with the little asterisk, which is a like the kind of program that you use when you don't have an operating system bigger than like a megabyte. So step one is always going to be learn stuff. You can't take notes unless you know stuff. And this is a reasonably complicated chart about all of the different things that, or different places that I get information from and things that I use. So if I'm starting with a question or a research topic, I will use ResearchRabbit or elicit.org or Refind, or frankly, just Google, and go find information. And if it is a scholarly article, usually I put it into Zotero. And if it is, just a link, I will very often just drop a link into Obsidian. Like sometimes all I need is the link, and I will make the title of that link whatever my claim is. And that's enough evidence for me. Sorry. So sometimes I am actively researching something, and a lot of the time I am passively just getting information. Like I read stuff on Twitter, I read stuff in my email, I read a lot of blogs, I talk to people sometimes that casually mention interesting things. And sometimes I highlight and annotate. And with tools like, Kindle and Readwise, it is easier to get the information, but it's not necessary. So I'm going to show you how I get rid of all of the automations and just do it. So this is a cooking blog that I was reading, and I almost never take notes about cooking. To be perfectly honest with you, I tend to print out recipes. I have a very organized little book, and when I cook with my son, I don't like to have screens. So we have, old-fashioned like page protectors. So I don't often take notes when I'm reading cooking blogs. But every now and then I accidentally stumble across something that is useful and interesting. So this was a claim that I made based on a cooking blog I was reading. Flour is easy to adulterate. So I had this epiphany of, oh, wow, I have a character who is a baker. And I've written a couple of stories about this character, but I've never had her deal with a scandal of the flour being adulterated. Let me make sure that I keep that information. And I have the whole quote there. It's also in my own words, right? Flour is easy to adulterate is in my own words. I have the section down here at the bottom that tells me why I bothered to take the note. And I have the evidence in case somebody asks me one day, hey, where did you get the idea for that story? Maybe I won't remember necessarily, but I will be able to find it again because I have made this note. So this is a claims folder. I have all of what I guess Andy calls atomic notes. And atomic notes is a very useful name, but I have this habit of trying to call these folders something that is useful for me. And I've actually gotten away from calling them Zettles with this new vault where I've rearranged my folder structure a little bit. And like, honestly, they're just claims. They are claims that I am making with evidence and an explanation of why I care. So we have fashion always changes, first contact is rare, and foraging behavior is linked with lifespan. And these are just claims. And I find that useful because when I'm flipping through this folder, there's a bunch of claims, and I see the claim, not necessarily the explanation of why it mattered to me, not necessarily the big quote, but I see these claims all the time. I see them on my graph view, I see them in my backlinks, I see them when I'm searching. So I really want the title of my note to be clear. So I'm a big fan of these call outs for separating out quotes. I used to use like HTML site to tell myself where I got the information from, but the new call outs function is in core. It used to be the admonitions plugin. So it's just a core, and you can see the code is here. They're really just block quotes with a like title section. They're very straightforward. If I am looking at this file in Notepad, it is completely readable because I have been using Markdown and email, for years. Like if I see that little caret, I know that's a block quote because that's just the syntax. Normally, I mark these little sections at the bottom with, I'm going to be honest, this is the hardest part to give up for me. I usually mark them with this little piece of code that I do. But you can do it with emojis. So you can absolutely, in a core safe mode vault with absolutely no theme, which this one is, use emojis to indicate the different kinds of thoughts in your bullets. So there's a temptation that all of your notes should be like this. All of my notes should be claims. And then I should always have a source note. I think that is a lot of pressure. If you look through my vault, which you guys totally can later, if you look through my vault, you will find things in all different kinds of formats. And as I went through this process of slowly migrating from my old plugins vault to this new safe mode vault, I kept seeing all of these things with all of these different formats. And there was this temptation to spend hours and hours and hours making it perfect and pretty. And I feel like it's really important to resist that urge because every single one of those notes was usable. And I had left myself little breadcrumbs of how I wanted to use it. It was always easy to find that again, even though my metadata wasn't the same. Even though sometimes it was in the top of the note, sometimes it was in bullet notes, it was all over the place in terms of organization. And the important thing is that the information was there. This is the oldest note in my vault. I originally wrote this note back when I was still using MediaWiki, which was an awful experience. I cannot recommend it. And this is actually the story I was telling that first made me know that I needed to take notes, because I had some correspondence with a college professor at a nearby college who was a civil engineering professor, and he had sent me reams of amazing information about the Nile River that was incredibly useful. So I started realizing that I needed to keep that information handy so that if I got pregnant, had a baby, and had to come back to that story 6 months later because I wasn't going to have time to work on it, I knew I wasn't going to remember. And I needed to have it handy. And having it handy has been really, really important. Excuse me. Avoid COVID if you can. So another thing that I like to use call-out boxes for are to separate the actual kind of notes from the what I'm going to use it for. If you're sort of following along with the slides, which maybe you're not, maybe you're just listening, one of the things that I visually feel a very strong need to do is separate out content from metadata. If I had just put this as a bullet, it would have blended in and I would have had to actually read the note in order to get the information. And I think it's very important to use visuals where possible to distinguish between types of information. That's why I like callouts so much, because they can let you separate a block quote from the callout. And callouts are, the syntax is right here on the right. It's just this little bracket exclamation point. You can do idea, you can do quote, you can do, I honestly, I think one of them is tip, one of them is warning, and you get these little icons, and the title just kind of stretches across the screen, and it lets you separate things out. So that's how I like to put these kinds of, this is what this is for. It doesn't matter exactly what format I use. Sometimes I will put an emoji at the bottom. Sometimes it will be in one of these callouts. There's like 7 different ways that I do this. But the important thing is, in every note, there is some visual distinction between content and what this is for. Excuse me. So if you'll note, flour is easy to adulterate was one of my actual claim notes before. But I also have other kinds of foods that are easy to adulterate. And I did not actually need notes about honey and extra virgin olive oil and seafood. Like I could have gone down this deep, deep rabbit hole of all of the foods that are easy to adulterate. And that would have taken me a lot of time. But instead of making atomic notes or claim notes for honey is one of the most famous foods in the world, like I already had the information in my notes. That's enough, right? It doesn't have to be each one of those is its own thing. I could have, but it would have taken more time. And there's, I feel, always a temptation to kind of keep going down the rabbit hole. So I try to stop myself from doing that. And then once it is in the notes, that is good enough. So the next time I am looking for foods that are easy to adulterate, I will have this information to hand. And if it becomes that I need to go find out more about the different ways that olive oil gets diluted, I can. I have a way to go. I've linked to more information. But this is all I needed, so I stopped. Sometimes, though, sometimes I do have all of these things. And I want to be able to make sure that I know how they are related. This is sort of, for me, one of the places where the magic happens. So BROLL is a sort of very well-known internet historian. He is one of the moderators for my favorite subreddit, Ask Historians, where I answer and ask and read very often. It is like one of the top places for me to get information from. And a lot of people answer questions on the subreddit, and I find them in different places with different usernames. So with BROLL, his username on Reddit is, I'm going to mangle this, but Iphicrates. And his username on Twitter is Roll Conagen, but his actual name is longer. So I want to be able to find everything he said so that I can connect it. So I can see what his expertise is and start to get a sense of where his interests and my interests overlap. So that if I ever reach out to him on Twitter, I will know all of the things he cares about. So that's one of the really great things about Obsidian, is that you can see all of the things that have come from that source. And there's not just author, right? It's not enough for me to say, this is the person who wrote this. It's also really important to know who published it. So I have by and via. And by is the author, and via is the publication. So the publication is Ask Historians, which I trust. Not like to the exclusion of all else, right? Like sometimes people are wrong, but I trust Ask Historians like more than a lot of other places. So I want to make sure that I remind myself that this is why. And not just that, for a lot of the subreddits, I like to keep track of, sorry, my chair is messed up. For a lot of the subreddits, I like to keep track of questions I've asked, gotten answered, that I liked but didn't have time to take notes on. So I will keep an index of that kind of information in the paragraph note. Sorry, not the paragraph note, in the publication note. And a lot of the time I will use external notes. Now, sometimes the source is not the kind of source that I trust to remain. Reddit is usually pretty good about keeping information until the end of days. Other websites I find less trustworthy, and I will admit that I do very often copy the whole thing. I'm a fan of the Markdownload plugin, or not, sorry, not plugin, the extension for Chrome, and I have a lot of backups of things that I care about. But honestly, you can usually find stuff on the places that I go to. A lot of the places that I go to have the information again. And a lot of the links that I am saving are not super important. So there's always a question of time versus like worthiness. How much is going and making like all of that information be in my notes worthwhile? And my rule of thumb is usually if I want it to show up in search again, I will make a copy of it and save it. And I will actually save it into my unaltered folder. So I have these reference folders. And you may note, those of you who have followed along, that this is a slightly different organizational structure than I had before. But I discovered as I was doing this migration into a safe mode vault was that I had some folders that really needed to be higher level and that I was using way more than I thought I would. And some folders that my naming schema was so clear that I could very comfortably merge those folders. So this was sort of my spring cleaning. And now my references are organized into external notes, which are mostly just links externally to what the like the link to where it is on the web. And then my internal notes, links to internal notes I made based on that. And then all of this unaltered stuff are PDFs that I've downloaded, the full text of an article I wanted to save. And then, sometimes I have stuff that I've saved, mostly PDFs that I frankly have not read yet, but would like to, maybe on a vacation someday. And that's a really important point of why I use folders. And I know that this is controversial, but I use folders because sometimes I'm on vacation on, let's say, my husband's computer. And we share the same network access storage NAS, like remote backup thing. So I can access my PDFs from his computer, but he doesn't have Obsidian installed. And maybe I just want to read something on vacation. I can find it very easily. It's in my unaltered folder or my unread folder. So that is just really useful for me. And I am a huge believer in focusing on how I'm going to use it and adapting to that rather than, oh, I heard someone say that they have this method that works for them. I'm going to take that and try it out. I usually like to start from, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. Here are all of the things that are true about me. How can I facilitate that? So for example, although I write the Obsidian Roundup, I almost never look at a plugin and go, oh, that's cool. I want to try that. I'm almost always sitting in a safe mode vault going, man, this is really annoying. I wish I had a plugin that would let me see the navigation path of this note because I have a lot of notes and I'm over in tags and I don't know what kind of note this is or where I put it. And I would like to know where I put it because that would help me find it again. And you can do that with the navigation button and show in System Explorer and all of that, but I'm a little bit lazy. So, that's me. But the important thing is that you really can replicate the functionality of most plugins in safe mode. It's just slightly more annoying. So for example, backlinks work fine for finding, everything related to Ask Historians. They work fine. They just take a couple of extra clicks and aren't as pretty. You kind of go with it and it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. And sometimes that matters. So we talked about folders. inevitably, I'm going to talk about tags, because tags are a core plugin, and with search and backlinks and tags, you can do almost all of the database stuff. You really can. You can narrow down your searches. You can kind of keep it up on the sidebar and go, oh yeah, I have 7 notes related to things that I could write a newsletter about on the topic of knives. So I guess that's going to be the next thing I work on. Or man, I have like 35 things that I have noted that I should research. Maybe I should spend some time researching. Or, I have 75 story stems. I don't need to read any more articles this week. I have enough to just go write 20 stories. So the tag pane being there is surprisingly useful, particularly for me as somebody who has historically not liked tags, because I had always thought of tags as something to use for categorization. It's always, oh, you can do everything that you can do with folders with tags. You can. That's a choice that you can make. But what if you used folders for folder things and then tags for other things? And then when you use them both, you have more discrete, conceptualized things in the context where you expect it. So all of my action items are tags. So when I look at my tags, it's always something that I could do, which occasionally gets overwhelming, but mostly it's okay. So, that's folders versus tags. Folders are convenient when I'm using other tools. I use them as a root. I've talked about this at length. I'm sure somebody there you go. Ken dropped a link. It makes access management very easy because I share portions of my notes with subscribers. So, tags are great, but Obsidian Publish does not have a button that says omit everything with this tag. You have to use the YAML, which means you have to remember to use the YAML. And for me personally, and this will not be true of everyone, but for me personally, I have a hotkey to just like Control M and move something into the folder I want it to go in. It is actually the least friction way to organize things for me because it's just a hotkey. Like I type a hotkey and like 2 numbers and then boom, I hit enter and it's sorted. I don't have to type tag. I don't have to scroll up to put the tag where I like tags to be. I just shove it where I want it to go. And that's a personality thing. Everybody likes to organize things differently, but I've always used folders at work. I've always used, dividers in my binder. It works for me. But the thing that doesn't make it into this debate very often, folders versus tag, is the graph. And I think that the graph gets kind of a bad reputation. It's like once a month, I see a popular Reddit thread or a viral thing on Twitter or, just something in Discord. Isn't the graph a bit of a gimmick? Don't you think that they just do it because it's pretty? You can't possibly navigate using the graph. And no, I don't navigate using the graph. Some people do, but I don't find that useful. But in the process of using safe mode for my vault, I didn't have the ability to use data view to put all of my files in a neat, orderly row by alphabet to tell me whether I had duplicated something. And I didn't have the ability to use data view to look at all of my readwise ID numbers of all of my things to see if I had duplicated any files. And I didn't have data view to tell me this file has this number of outgoing links. And all of the things that I use data view for, I actually used the graph for, and it worked surprisingly well. Not literally all of the things that I use data view for. Sometimes the backlinks worked. But for a lot of my common queries with data view personally, the ones that I use most often tend to be things like, show me the most important thing from this source that is most outlinked so I know to focus on that. And the graph view is really good at that. There's value in knowing that I have a ton of orphan notes that are just floating out unconnected to anything. There's usefulness in seeing what things are linked and unlinked at a very top level view. It lets me notice, man, I've only used like half of the things from this article. This other article is right in the middle of all of my notes and all of my books, and it's all spread out, and the note is really big. And I read a lot of books, but I can tell you just from looking at the graph view that the 3 books that I keep going back to are Tamed by Alice Roberts, The Horse, the Wheel, and Language by David Anthony, and Civilizations of Africa. And the thing about Civilizations of Africa, by an author whose name I can't recall, is that was one of the first books I ever took notes on. And I took notes on that book in almost the silliest of ways, where I actually, all of my headers were chapter titles, which I don't recommend. But the thing about the graph was that I realized how important that book was to me. And like, I reference it and I mention it sometimes, but seeing it in the graph really rammed home, I haven't written a review of that book, and I could and maybe should. So like, there's real value in seeing that top level thing. So here's a picture of my graphs. The old graph from my original vault, you can see that it is much larger than the new vault. You can see that there's a lot more stuff happening in the middle. And no, I'm not navigating from this. So no, I can't see the titles. But I do know, just from looking at it, that the vault on the right has mostly sources and their connected claims. And I can tell that because it has a lot more little dots with a bunch of little dots around it. Because I know this and you don't, but I haven't actually moved over my story like prep notes. All of my in progress stories haven't made it over. So that's the big difference between the vault on the left and the vault on the right. And the vault on the left is so much more robust and interconnected because it actually has where I'm using those notes for. So you can get information from the graph. You just have to kind of take it for what it is and not try to shoehorn it into being something it's not. And not all of my notes are this really academic style. Here is a source. Here is a claim. Here is a product. Like they don't always have to be that. Sometimes they're concept notes, which is a lot more like what I think Nick calls a map of content, but I don't like to put words in his mouth. So my concept notes are usually 1 word, 2 words at the most. That's a lie. I'm looking at my screen. It's like child sacrifice in the Punic world. That's like 5 words. But you'll note that these aren't claims. They are topics. Assyria, their places, locations, Babylon, bees, Chinese infrastructure. And all of the stuff that I have on those concepts gets put into that note. And a lot of the times I'm thinking about writing a newsletter about it. And sometimes it's just like, man, I have a lot on ceramics. And every now and then I'm thinking of creating a society in my fantasy world. And I want to think about, well, okay, what kind of pot would they have? So I go check my ceramic thing and figure out everything I have on that as I'm seeking inspiration. Sometimes it's useful to keep track of notes by type, but I've gotten away from this mostly because if you'll note, all of my atomic notes have the same kind of claim title or concept title. All of my newsletters are prepended with a date, and all of my literature notes are a title and a person. So this is a really old note. And I put it here specifically to show people that if you have a good naming system, you don't really need to separate by type. Like you don't have to do folders in order to separate by type. That's not the point of me using folders. Me using folders is much more when I'm using Notepad in my file explorer. I want the note I was looking for. So the point here is that there are a lot of different ways that you can organize stuff. And it's okay to try them all out, because at the end of the day, your notes still work. They don't have to be uniform. They don't have to follow one specific system. I certainly have not in my last year and a half. Wow, year and a half of using Obsidian. I have used a lot of different formats. And they're just useful. When I'm thinking about fashion for my books, like, okay, I don't want to do the same tunics that everybody, like, you know, every book has very, you know, different ways of describing characters, and there's a lot of value in having things that people are used to. But you know, sometimes I just like to go wild and learn stuff, so that when I'm at a party or chatting on Discord, like, hey, did you know that, you know, Japanese children's fashion is actually really different from adults' fashion, which is not how the Europeans did it in, you know, vaguely the 1800s-ish. A lot of them will dress up their kids like little adults. My son wears, you know, jeans and a t-shirt just like I do. So it's interesting to see the different ways that fashion can go, and that's useful for me. So, excuse me. The goal is always to find use in the notes. And one of the handy tricks that I have actually discussed with the Obsidian developers today is that you can alias your notes to a bunch of different things and then find the relevant notes. So you'll note that my note about Assyria, which is aliased to Assyrian, does not have a ton of content. I don't need to write an essay about Assyria. That's not there. Like, there are encyclopedia articles for that. But I do need to occasionally remind myself where Assyria is, because I learn about a lot of different cultures and regions and places and city-states. So rather than go through the effort of every time I talk about Assyria, I will just alias it, and then I will use the unlinked mentions. Like, if I really do need to go find everything that I have said about Assyria, I am somewhat heretical and don't bother to link it, because I can find it again. And that's always my goal. Can I find this again? Is the question I ask myself. So if I'm writing about China or Assyria or wherever, if I link every single place that shows up in my notes, that's not where the value of my notes is. I'm almost never worried about everything I know about China. That's not how I write. I'm learning those claims. I'm making evidence-based statements. I'm not usually saying things like, China is. I'm usually saying things like, the Chinese people did in this era. So when I'm just kind of every now and then trying to remember all of the stuff that I said about Assyria, I can just search for Assyria. And I usually do. But I can also put all of those aliases into my file and then search for all of that stuff. And they show up on unlinked mentions, as long as, and this is the edge case I discovered today, because there's always an edge case, as long as they are not linked to something else. So if I had linked this note about which used to belong to Assyria, if I had linked that to things that used to belong to Assyria, that was a note, it would not show up in my backlinks. So be warned, sometimes search is better. And I say backlinks, but unlinked mentions, it's the backlinks pain. And I think that's everything for the slide. So I do occasionally hear things like, you don't need cool programs to do stuff, just write. And when I try to do that, I have a blank page and I find it very stressful. When I don't have a blank page, things are better. So this is literally just a search of story stems. I sometimes have time to write. Sometimes my son's asleep, like right now. And I sit down and I'm like, man, I should do something. but I have just gotten off of 4 hours of playing with a toddler, and I don't like have any fresh ideas sitting in my head still. So I have to go find them and give myself something to do. So, I have information on modern hunter-gatherers that I apparently could have used as a story inspiration. And I can write a story about when trees in a particular region of my world start dying. And I could have a mage, threaten to destroy a bunch of water, which I'm probably going to write soon, because recently one of the publications I really like had an anthology theme for salt. Salt and sand was the theme. And I ran a search just like this, but I added salt to the end, and I found all of the story ideas I ever had that involved salt. And that's really useful for me in my particular use case. So the thing that you really do need to keep in mind when using this method of using the search is that tag searches are going to be block-based. You can click the little arrows and show yourself more context, but at the end of the day, do yourself the favor of putting your tag on the relevant line. Look at the difference between, civil mage style story stem. The actual inspiration isn't there. It's not helpful. There's something there, but I don't know what, because I didn't put that tag on the right line. And you'll note, so down by triple divide peak, I have this little bracket I bracket, and that is from a theme. It is built into core Obsidian. You only need CSS to make it work. But if I'm using base Obsidian, it doesn't render. And that's okay, because it's an I, and I know that it stands for idea. So even in plain text or source mode or Notepad or Vim, I know it was an idea. The text works, but you can also use emojis. And this is just proof that I, brought all of my notes over and did not edit all 1,800 of them to remove all of the data task icons. And data task is just the name of the CSS attribute. But again, you don't have to use CSS to get the same effect. You can literally use an emoji. All the CSS does is change bracket I bracket to an emoji. That's it. That's all it does. I don't know. I don't like the hotkey for finding the emoji. It's like the Windows key, and I just don't like it. But that's not necessary for the process. So you can use these notes for outlining articles. Feminist history is real history is this mantra I have. Every time I see something that is interesting about history that involves women, I'm like, you know what? You hear a lot of stuff on the internet from guys who think that, whenever there's a strong, powerful woman, or a woman at all, in a fantasy novel, that's anachronistic and not real history. So I casually like to keep a list of all of the really cool women in history and powerful moments that women had in history, so that inevitably when somebody says that to my face, I can angrily write an article in response. I haven't gotten around to it yet because no one has said that to my face. But when they do, I'm ready. And that's the value of my notes, because it will happen one day. But a lot of note takers, particularly, people who talk about productivity, are creating content, right? That's what we do. Nick and I create content. So a lot of our notes are designed around creating content. But what if you're someone like my husband who has no desire whatsoever to create content on the internet? Notes are still valuable. Excuse me. So I have been trying out different email providers over the last, years. And I'm still stuck with Gmail because every single email provider I have ever tried has one critical failure. And I have a lot of friends who are developers. And every now and then somebody will mention an interview tool that they really liked. And I write it down so that when I'm out for a walk with some of my developer friends and they mention that they're looking for jobs, I can say, oh, hey, did you hear about Invisible Network? I've heard it's great. When somebody asks me about RSS, real simple syndication, man, I literally just went to take a note about that, but this is a PowerPoint presentation. Somebody remind me that Fastmail supports snooze. So, you know, I'm a big believer in the open internet. I love RSS. I love ActivityPub. I love all of these things that let you own your data, like Obsidian. I keep a list, and I keep a list of survey tools for all of the various reasons that one might need to use a survey, and Zotero tips and Twitter tools. And I have a whole like folder full of just tool indexes, because I used to use bookmarks for all of this stuff. And you know what you can't do with bookmarks easily? You can't annotate bookmarks in Chrome, or like if you can, you didn't used to be able to. So I've gotten into the habit of using Obsidian for all of my bookmarks that I care about, and it's really handy. But also, you know, I'm a mom. On my full-time job, the reason that I have so much time for Reddit is because my son takes excellent naps, but I still have to be home. And I spend a lot of time, like, you know, worried about my kid. And I don't talk about parenting online much because, quite frankly, talking about parenting online is usually awful. But every now and then I will stumble across a useful piece of information that I might need. Like this note about night terrors. And my son's a great sleeper. He doesn't have night terrors. But this was just a really rich resource. And what if he does have nightmares one day? I'm never going to find that random Reddit thread again. But I will definitely find my notes. And the first place I always look when I'm stressed out about something or curious or want to know what I said is my notes. So I saved this information because I didn't want to have to go back through that whole Reddit thread, which, trust me, was very long. I just wanted the key details. So I wrote them down, added some links, and you'll note I did not bother to say who wrote this because I don't care. They were a random person on Reddit. There is a 0% chance that I need to go through the effort of creating a person note about the person who wrote this thing on Reddit with a bunch of links to scholarly articles. I have the scholarly articles. If I need them, they're there. You know, and I'm comfortable with external links for this because I'm probably not going to be searching for nightmares. It's, you know, and more importantly, those external links will get updated, probably, maybe, I hope, if there's new information. So if I'm linking to the CDC, presumably the CDC will be more up to date than my 5-year-old notes if my second kid has nightmares. So, you know, you can check out my newsletter if you want to see examples of this. I also have my actual vault. I upload it every month, like the actual physical, like all of the markdown notes for subscribers. But, you know, more importantly, who has questions? Because I still have 6 minutes. I wasn't paying attention to the questions, so Nick, help.
Yeah, totally. This has been great. Yeah, looking at the time, so we'll only have 1 or 2, but we'll save the questions.
Sorry.
But that's okay. So I'm going to forego the digital round of applause so we can get to a couple questions. And then at the very end, we're going to all go into the chat to talk about our favorite takeaway. And I think that'll be a nice gift, not just to Eleanor, but to actually all of us. So let's go in the chat, and I hope you don't mind the nickname, but Fast Straw Dan. No, I have a nickname for Fast Straw Danny Hatcher because he's always got the first comment in there. I think it's great. So I hope you don't mind that. I mean it with adoration. Can you share a finished note and go through how you link it all together with sources?
A finished note. What's a finished note? I don't know what a finished note is. Why would my notes be finished? What does that even look like? Not ironically, I'm not trolling you. I don't understand.
You know, probably a note that you feel is more mature or developed, or it's a nice claim. A claim that's a great question. So perhaps it's, you know, you have your concepts that are kind of mini, you know, MOCs in many ways.
Yeah.
And then maybe seeing how one of those goes into a newsletter.
I can show you a newsletter. Products.
It's for the nice theme you have there. Wow.
Yeah, thanks for fixing it. All right, so the thing about my finished notes is that very often as I finish it, like the outline kind of becomes less relevant. So canals went out recently, and let's see, I just kind of use them. Like here we go. Blights are a big deal. Here's my references. Like that's the thing, right? I'm not taking notes to have nice notes. I'm taking notes like to use. So here's the chestnut blight, and here's some stuff I use it for, and you just kind of bounce around.
Yeah.
They're never done. They're just there. Sorry, Danny. I'll try to do better next time.
That's pretty good though. I really got a lot out of a lot of the things you said. Claims is really sticking with me as far as just a word to use, because I think language is so valuable. I like to have a rich amount of language, but instead of saying, I'll normally say there are like thing notes, or concepts, and then there are opinions about those things or statements about those things. But I do like claims as being this, anytime we can kind of have a broad word, I think that gives us some flexibility in our thinking, and claims does that, but it's still specific enough that you know what goes in there. Real fast though. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's just do the note making right now, everyone, in the chat before we run out of time. What's a takeaway that you had? What is something that you derived from this amazing presentation by Eleanor? Let's see in the chat some of these things. I make notes to use. I love the call outs. They were new to me. Focus on your future use of your notes, not on conforming to a particular organizational structure. The claim, using folders for foldery things. Emphasizing that a tag provides block level context was a great reminder. Yeah, to get the tag on the actual block. Notes that don't need to be perfect, but just searchable. And there are plenty of other good ones. And so take a moment, look through that. You can look through it faster than I can say out loud. But there are some really amazing things here. We can learn from each other this way. Little capper on this session.
Yeah, I saw it. Sorry, I saw going by. Ramses. Sorry, I can't pronounce it. Remind me, Nick.
Ramses.
Ramses. Uses notes like the opposite of how I do. He's great, but it is always interesting to kind of see the different ways that all work.
Absolutely.
And so depends on what you're doing.
I think we're going to go like 2 minutes over, but I want to make sure we get the Eleanor links in. The Eleanor, where can we best, learn more from you? Where do you want to send people?
So it depends on what you want to learn. If you want to learn about Obsidian and note-taking and like my thoughts on knowledge management, stuff like this, the Obsidian Roundup is where to go. And if you want to read my stories and actually learn about weird history and mythic cats that could save a werewolf, that's the Iceberg. They're different because like half of the people that subscribe to the Iceberg absolutely do not care about note-taking. And half of the people that subscribe to the Roundup absolutely do not care about weird history. So I don't want to bother those people. But some people like them both.
Yeah, it's a nice Venn diagram with plenty, they're overlapping, but then plenty that's not as well. And so a couple other things that I think are worth mentioning while we still have everyone is that you're also going to be a guest weekly guide in the upcoming Linking Your Thinking workshop. So thank you for doing that. So there'll be 4 live sessions that you put on. That'll be pretty cool. And I think just overall, I think it was Isaac in the chat I saw, this came at a really good time. I think this is the 6th out of 15 live sessions in the conference. And so what you showed was a really good way, I think, to reflect on some of the other presentations, put some context into it within, this particular tool, but in a very agnostic way, in a very future-proofed way. So even if someone's coming at this for the first time, you can take a lot away from this, I think. So just want to say thank you for that, Eleanor, and would love for you to have the last words and then we'll close this thing out.
Yeah, so the one question that caught my eye as things were flicking by, I really do read fast. I think I kept up with the chat. Is that somebody asked why go into safe mode? And other than like sometimes you are required to go into safe mode for your job, because plugins absolutely work offline and like they're probably not going to steal your data or whatnot. And you can have backups. But the nice thing about safe mode is that it really makes you think about what matters to you. And it's a bit like spring cleaning. Like I'm immediately after this I'm going to go install the plugin that lets me see the file path in the bottom of my screen. I don't know why that's the one that is killing me to not have, but like data view is really great. And, like all of them are really great, but it's those little quality of life things that just make it like a quarter of a second faster and more convenient, but you don't appreciate them quite as much or even realize that they're still there. Like I forget that Tag Wrangler is a plugin and not core all the time, but it really does make you sit down and think, how will this work if I didn't have Obsidian? If I open this file in Notepad, is it still readable? If I send this to my husband, will it make sense to him? And all of that is just a really nice way to sit down and think, have I gotten a little top heavy? If DataView puts out an update that is going to horribly break some of my things because I have a different opinion about how bullet points should work than the creator of DataView does, which is going to happen, how much is that going to hurt? And the answer is not very. Losing my plugins honestly didn't really slow me down much. It just like annoyed me a bit. But there's still hotkeys and there's still backlinks and there are still callouts. And I really do think that everything you need is available in core.
Yeah, that was really cool that you took that challenge upon yourself to do that and show what's possible. And a helpful reminder too. So we all have different various degrees. I think there's a pretty scary warning when you jump out of safe mode if you use Obsidian. The developers, I'm thinking they did that just to cover their own behinds a little bit, but I don't think it should be that scary to turn off safe mode. But they just want you to recognize that that then you are taking the crowdsourced understanding of a plugin as your safety net. Okay, 100,000 plus people have downloaded DataView. Is that good enough for me to trust it? That's up to you. Okay, you go, Eleanor, and then I'm going to get into our speakers for tomorrow, and then we'll wrap.
Yes. Very last thing, I'm so sorry that I went over. I filled the time, but did not leave enough time for questions. I honestly did not know that this many people would show up. Hi, everyone. You're great. Nick is going to hopefully, or Dan is going to send me all of the questions. And just like I did the last time that I had one of these things with Nick and we ran over, I will write an article answering all of the questions and I will put it on the Obsidian Roundup. So if you asked a question and I didn't get a chance to answer it, I will answer it in text. Like, give me a week, but I promise that I will not forget you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And then tomorrow we have 3 presenters, one from the Obsidian community. But first, we're starting with personal retreats with Mike Schmitz, a little bit of knowledge management and productivity with Max Sparky, aka David Sparks. And then we'll finish with a look at daily notes with Leah Ferguson, who is also an Obsidian moderator, I do believe. So with that in mind, one more round of applause. Thank you so much, Eleanor, for your time. Woo! This was amazing. So much to take from this. And I'm going to end with a little bit of that musical tune out. So I'm going to take over the screen share and then you can have a nice exit, everyone. Until next time, stay connected.